The hotel lobby sparkled that evening. Soft lights shone from the chandeliers and the air smelled of expensive perfume and polished wood. Guests in elegant clothes filled the room, chatting and laughing while the sound of clinking glasses echoed faintly in the background. In the center of the lobby stood a brand new grand piano, black, glossy, and shining like a mirror. Everyone admired it, though no one dared touch it. It was a showpiece, meant to impress the visitors. Among the hotel staff moving quietly through the crowd was a tall, middle-aged security guard. He stood near the entrance, keeping an eye on everything with calm attention. His uniform was neat, though his shoes had seen better days. He was the kind of man most people didn't notice. He nodded politely when guests passed by, but rarely spoke unless he had to. To everyone, he was just the guard, invisible, ordinary, and silent. The hotel's owner, a proud man with a booming laugh, loved being the center of attention. He stood near the piano, talking to a group of guests. One of them joked about how beautiful the piano looked, but wondered if anyone there could actually play it. The boss laughed loudly, patting the piano lid. "Play it?" "Not a chance," he said. "This piano costs more than some cars. If anyone without training even touches it, they're fired on the spot." The group burst out laughing. As the laughter echoed, one of the guests noticed the security guard standing a few feet away and smirked. "Hey, why don't we let the guard play?" he said jokingly. The others chuckled. The boss turned and looked at the guard with amusement. "If he touches that piano," the boss said, laughing louder, "he's fired." Everyone laughed again. The guard smiled faintly but said nothing. He just gave a small nod and looked away. The laughter faded and the conversation moved on. No one noticed the look in the guard's eyes, a mix of sadness and something deeper, like an old wound being reopened. He stood silently, pretending the joke didn't bother him, but inside his heart felt heavy. Hours passed. The event ended and the guests left one by one. The lights dimmed, leaving only a few warm lamps glowing near the reception desk. The guard made his rounds, checking doors and hallways. When he returned to the lobby, he found himself standing near the piano again. It looked different now, quieter, almost lonely. He stood there for a long moment, just looking at it. He reached out his hand but stopped halfway. His fingers trembled slightly before he pulled them back. He took a deep breath and looked around to make sure no one was watching. The place was empty, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Slowly, he placed his hand on the piano surface. The cool, smooth touch brought a rush of memories. He remembered being a boy, sitting in a small living room with an old upright piano that his mother had bought secondhand. She used to sit beside him, smiling as he practiced simple melodies. She worked long hours cleaning offices just so she could afford his lessons. He remembered the first time he played in a small competition and how proud she was, clapping louder than anyone else in the room. Those were good days, until life changed. His mother fell ill and he had to quit school to work. One job led to another, and music slowly faded into the background. Years passed. He stopped playing, stopped dreaming. Eventually he ended up here, a night security guard, invisible to everyone, standing beside a piano he couldn't touch. He sighed deeply and turned away. But as he took a few steps, something inside him refused to let go. He turned back. The silence in the lobby felt almost inviting. He sat down slowly on the piano bench, his heart pounding. His hands hovered above the keys, uncertain. Then, without thinking, he pressed one. A single soft note filled the air, clear and pure. He froze. It had been so long since he'd heard that sound beneath his own hands. Another note followed, then another. The melody came out hesitantly at first, then smoother as his fingers remembered what to do. The sound grew richer, flowing gently through the empty hall like a whisper. He closed his eyes and let his hands move on their own. The music came from somewhere deep inside him, from the years he had locked away his emotions. Every note carried a piece of his past. The joy of childhood, the pain of loss, and the quiet strength of survival. For the first time in years, he felt alive. He didn't notice the small group of people standing in the doorway. A few cleaning staff had paused, their brooms in hand, listening. One of them whispered, "That can't be him, can it?" Another shook her head softly. The guard kept playing, unaware that his secret audience was growing. The soft tune wrapped around them like a gentle blanket. Some of them smiled. One even wiped a tear from her eye. The guard finished the piece with a slow, fading note. Silence followed. He kept his hands on the keys, afraid to open his eyes. When he finally did, he saw the small crowd watching him. Embarrassed, he stood up quickly. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, stepping back. But instead of scolding him, the workers began clapping softly. One of them whispered, "That was beautiful." He smiled shyly, unsure how to react. For a moment, he forgot about the boss's warning. The feeling of connection, the warmth in the eyes of the people who heard him, it meant more than anything else. He nodded to them and said, "Thank you," before walking away. Later, when he returned to his small room behind the maintenance area, he lay on his bed staring at the ceiling. His fingers still tingled from playing. He thought about the piano, the laughter earlier that night, and the way the music had filled the room. Something inside him had awakened, something he didn't know still existed. Over the next few days, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Each night when the lobby emptied, he felt the same pull toward the piano. He wanted to play again, to feel that peace. But he also remembered the boss's words. If he touches the piano, he's fired. The thought made him hesitate. Still, music has a way of finding its way back. On the fourth night, after everyone had gone home, he gave in. He walked quietly to the piano and sat down once more. This time, he played with more confidence. The melody was different, brighter, filled with hope. It told the story of a man rediscovering a part of himself he thought he had lost forever. Unknown to him, the hotel's night manager had come in early that evening to check on some paperwork. Hearing the sound, she followed it to the lobby. When she saw the guard playing, she didn't interrupt. She simply stood at a distance, listening. She noticed the way his face softened when he played, the way his shoulders relaxed, and how his music seemed to fill the entire space with warmth. When he finished, she smiled and quietly slipped away, deciding not to mention it to anyone. She understood what that moment meant. Sometimes people need to do something that makes them feel alive, even if it breaks a small rule. The following night, the guard played again, just for a few minutes. It became his quiet routine. Every time his fingers touched the keys, he felt peace. The hotel, usually just a workplace, had become something else, a place where his spirit could breathe again. But good things rarely stay hidden forever. Word started to spread among the night staff. They would finish their cleaning early, just to listen from the hallway. The soft music became part of their night. They even began calling it the secret concert. It gave them comfort in their long shifts. The guard didn't realize how much it meant to others. To him, it was just a few stolen minutes of happiness. He didn't know that one night soon, his music would reach the wrong ears, and that the same piano he had once been forbidden to touch would change his life forever. The next night came with a cool breeze drifting through the hotel's glass doors. The lobby was quiet again, the way it always was after the guests had gone. The faint sound of the city outside barely reached the thick carpets and polished walls. The guard made his usual rounds, checking the hallways, locking the back entrances and making sure everything was in order. Yet his mind wasn't on his work. It was on the piano. All through the day, he had told himself he wouldn't touch it again. He didn't want to risk his job. But as the clock struck midnight, the temptation grew stronger. The piano was calling to him again, not in words, but in memory and feeling. It wasn't just a musical instrument anymore, it was the only thing that still made him feel like himself. He stood at a distance, staring at it for a long time. The room was empty, the lights dimmed except for a faint glow from the chandelier. Slowly, he walked over and ran his fingers along the smooth edge of the piano lid. It felt cold but familiar. He lifted it gently and sat down. His reflection looked back at him from the glossy black surface. When he pressed the first key, the note echoed softly, like a secret being told to the night. Then another and another. His hands remembered where to go, his fingers dancing on the keys. The sound filled the space, floating up to the ceiling and bouncing back down. It was peaceful but also full of longing. As he played, he thought of the years he had lost. The times he had walked past music stores but couldn't bring himself to go inside. The times he had promised himself he'd play again one day but never did. Every note carried those memories, the sadness, the dreams, the hope. What he didn't know was that the night manager had arrived early again. She had liked listening the first time, and now she quietly came to the lobby whenever she could. Tonight she brought a cup of coffee and sat in the corner, hidden behind a tall plant. She watched him play, smiling softly. The way he played was different. There was emotion, a kind of honesty that only came from someone who had lived through loss and still had the courage to create beauty. Halfway through the song, he suddenly stopped. He thought he had heard something. He turned around quickly, his heart racing. But no one was there. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner broke the silence. He sighed in relief and looked back at the piano, whispering, "Just a few more minutes." He began again, this time with a softer melody, slow and calm. It was a song he had written years ago, back when he dreamed of becoming a musician. His mother used to hum along when he played it at home. He smiled faintly, remembering her face. The music seemed to bring her back to life for a moment. When he finished, he sat quietly, letting the final notes fade. The night manager stood up, careful not to startle him. "That was beautiful," she said softly. He turned, surprised. For a second, he didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I know I'm not supposed to be playing. Please don't tell the boss." She shook her head. "Don't worry," she replied with a gentle smile. "Your secret is safe. You play with real heart. It's been a long time since I've heard something like that." He looked at her, unsure if she was serious. "I used to play," he said quietly, "before life got in the way." She nodded, understanding more than he realized. Sometimes life gets in the way of who we really are. But when you play, you look alive again. Her words stayed with him long after she left. That night, as he walked home, he kept thinking about what she said. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe there was still something left inside him worth sharing. In the following days, his small nighttime performances continued. The cleaning staff often lingered nearby, pretending to work while they listened. The music became a small comfort for everyone working the night shift. Some even said their long nights felt shorter because of it, but not everyone found it harmless. One evening, as he played a soft piece, someone else noticed. The hotel's assistant manager. He had stayed late to check the security logs and was walking past the lobby when he heard the music. At first he thought it was a recording, but then he saw the guard sitting at the piano. The assistant manager frowned and pulled out his phone, snapping a quick photo. The next morning, that photo landed on the boss's desk. When the boss saw it, his face turned red with anger. "He did what?" he shouted. "I said no one touches that piano. Especially not the guard." He slammed his hand on the desk. "I'll handle this myself." That afternoon, the boss came in earlier than usual. He didn't tell anyone what he planned to do. He wanted to catch the guard in the act. That night, the guard began his shift like always. He greeted the front desk clerk, checked the security cameras, and walked through the lobby. Everything seemed normal. Around midnight, when the hotel had quieted down, he sat at the piano again. His fingers began to move over the keys, gentle and sure. The boss stood silently near the hallway entrance, hidden in the shadows, watching. His expression was cold at first, but as the music continued, something began to shift in his eyes. The melody was so honest, so full of emotion that it softened even his stern heart. He stood there, listening without moving. The guard, unaware of the audience, played with all he had. He poured his feelings into every note, the joy, the pain, the gratitude. The boss remembered his own childhood, his father playing the radio while fixing old cars, humming along to songs. For a moment, he was no longer the boss, just a man remembering something pure. When the music finally stopped, the boss stepped forward, his shoes clicking on the marble floor. The guard froze when he saw him. His heart dropped. He stood up immediately. "Sir, I'm sorry," he stammered. "I didn't mean—" The boss raised his hand. "You can stop apologizing," he said quietly. "Sit down." The guard hesitated but obeyed. The boss walked closer to the piano and looked at it, then at the guard. "You play well," he said after a pause. "Where did you learn?" The guard looked surprised. "Just from a teacher when I was young," he said softly. "It's been many years," the boss nodded slowly. "You know, I thought you were wasting time. But now I see you weren't. You were giving life to this place." The guard didn't know how to respond. He expected anger, maybe even to be fired. But instead, the boss seemed thoughtful. "I said something stupid the other night," the boss continued, almost to himself. "I joked that if you touched the piano, you'd be fired. But after hearing you play, I realize I was wrong." He paused, looking at the piano. Music like that doesn't belong in silence. The guard blinked, unsure if he was hearing correctly. "You're not firing me?" The boss smiled faintly. "No, not tonight. In fact, I want you to play again. But next time, you won't do it in secret." He turned and began walking away, leaving the guard speechless. As he reached the hallway, he said without looking back, "We're hosting a gala next week. You'll play there. Let's see what the guests think of our security guard." The guard stood still for a long moment, his mind spinning. He couldn't tell if this was a reward or a test. Either way, everything was about to change. Over the next few days, the hotel buzzed with quiet curiosity. Word spread quickly. The staff whispered to each other, wondering if the story was true. Some laughed, some were excited, and a few doubted it would really happen. The guard tried to stay calm, but inside he was nervous. It had been years since he played in front of a real audience. He practiced every night after work. The night manager encouraged him, often bringing him tea and sitting nearby as he played. She told him, "Don't think about them. Just play like you always do." When the night of the gala finally arrived, the piano stood in the center of the lobby, polished and shining under the lights. The guests arrived one by one, dressed in their finest clothes, holding glasses of champagne. The boss gave a small speech, his voice proud yet calm. Then he looked toward the guard and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you'll hear something special." The guard's heart pounded as he sat down at the piano. His hands trembled for a second, but then he closed his eyes and began to play. The first few notes floated into the air, warm and pure. The noise of the crowd faded away. The music carried emotion so deep that even the guests, who moments ago were chatting, fell silent. As he played, his fear disappeared. There was only the music, the story of his life told through sound. Each note spoke of struggle, of love, of hope that never died. When he finished, the hall stayed silent for a second, and then came a wave of applause. It was louder than anything he'd ever heard. For the first time in many years, the guard smiled freely. The boss clapped the loudest, and the staff cheered from the sides. The piano that once symbolized what he wasn't allowed to touch had now become the very thing that gave him back his dignity and his dream. The applause from the gala night echoed in the guard's mind for days. It felt unreal. For so long he had been invisible, someone who opened doors, checked cameras, and quietly disappeared when others came near. But that night he had stood in front of everyone, playing from the heart, and for the first time in years people saw him for who he truly was. Not as a guard, but as a musician. The morning after the event, the hotel buzzed with stories about the performance. Guests who had attended the gala spoke about it with surprise and admiration. Some even came back to the lobby the next day just to see the piano and ask if the same man would play again. The staff, too, couldn't stop talking about it. The cleaners, the receptionists, even the chefs, they all felt proud. It was as if one of their own had achieved something big, but the guard himself didn't let it go to his head. He still arrived early for his shift, checked the doors, and kept his uniform neat. Yet inside, something had changed. He walked with a bit more confidence, his shoulders straighter. When guests greeted him, he no longer avoided eye contact. The music had given him back something life had taken away: dignity. One afternoon, the boss called him to the office. The guard felt a mix of nervousness and curiosity. He knocked on the door and stepped inside. The boss was sitting behind his large wooden desk reading some papers. When he looked up, he smiled in a way the guard hadn't seen before. "You made quite an impression," the boss said. "The guests loved it. Some even asked if we plan to have live piano music every weekend. I think it's time we talk about that." The guard blinked, unsure what to say. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Thank you," the boss nodded. "You've earned it. You brought something to this place that money can't buy. Emotion, warmth. People felt something genuine that night. That's rare these days." The guard smiled a little shyly. "I only played from my heart. I didn't expect any of this." The boss leaned back in his chair. "Well, expect it now. I want you to play twice a week in the lobby. We'll still keep you on as security, but I'll pay you extra for the performances. Think of it as a double role." For a moment, the guard didn't move. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. "I don't know what to say," he said finally, his voice trembling slightly. "Thank you, sir. This means a lot," the boss smiled. "You deserve it. You reminded all of us that sometimes talent hides in the most unexpected places." From that day on, the piano in the lobby was no longer just a decoration. Every Friday and Sunday evening, the guard played soft melodies while guests sat with coffee or wine, listening quietly. Some filmed him and shared short clips online. Within weeks, those clips spread fast. People from other cities began commenting. saying how moving it was to see a security guard playing like a professional musician. The hotel received calls asking about him. "Is he really one of your guards?" They'd ask. "He plays like he's trained his whole life." The boss began to see that the music wasn't just entertainment. It was bringing attention to the hotel. Guests started booking stays just to hear him perform in person. The staff joked that he had become their secret marketing tool, but for the guard it wasn't about fame or money. Every time he sat down to play, he felt close to his mother again. He imagined her standing beside him, smiling the way she used to. The music was his way of keeping her memory alive. One evening, after his performance, a little girl approached him. She had been sitting near the front with her parents, watching closely the whole time. She held a small notepad in her hand. "Sir," she said shyly, "can you teach me to play like that one day?" The guard looked down at her and smiled warmly. "You love music?" She nodded eagerly. "Yes, I have a small keyboard at home, but it doesn't sound like this." He laughed softly. "That's how I started too. Keep practicing. Play every day, even when you don't feel like it. Music will always be your friend." Her parents thanked him and left, but the moment stayed with him. He realized that what he was doing wasn't just for himself. It was inspiring others. People who felt small or forgotten were watching him and seeing hope. Still, not everything was easy. A few of the hotel's upper managers weren't happy with all the attention he was getting. They whispered behind closed doors that he was just a guard and didn't deserve so much recognition. One even told the boss privately, "You can't let the staff think they're stars. It sets a bad example." The boss listened but didn't agree. He had seen something special in the guard and wasn't about to take that away. One night, while the guard was performing, a man in a suit entered the lobby. He stood quietly at the back, listening for a few minutes. When the song ended, he approached the piano. "That was incredible," he said. "Do you play professionally?" The guard shook his head modestly. "No, sir. I just play here at the hotel." The man smiled. "Well, I work with a small music studio in the city. We produce local artists. I'd love to invite you to record a few pieces sometime. You have real talent." The guard's heart skipped a beat. "Me record? I'm not sure I'm ready for that." The man chuckled. "You're more ready than you think. I'll leave you my card. Think about it." He placed a business card on the piano and walked away. The guard stared at it for a long time after the man left. His mind was spinning. The thought of recording in a real studio seemed impossible. He had barely accepted being called a performer, and now someone wanted to record him. That night after his shift, he went home and sat in silence for a long time. The idea both excited and scared him. What if he wasn't good enough? What if people laughed? But then he remembered the applause, the smiles, the little girl who wanted to learn. Maybe it was time to stop doubting himself. A few days later, he called the number on the card. The man was delighted and invited him to visit the studio the following week. When he arrived, he felt out of place among all the cables, microphones, and soundboards. But once he sat at the piano and closed his eyes, everything felt right again. The music flowed easily. The producers in the control room exchanged surprised looks. They weren't expecting such depth from a man who wore a security uniform. When the session ended, the producer said, "You have something rare. It's not just skill, it's soul. People will feel this." They decided to record 3 of his original pieces. One of them, the soft melody he used to play late at night in the hotel, became their favorite. When the recordings were uploaded online, they spread quickly. Comments poured in from people all over the world. Some said the music made them cry. Others said it helped them sleep or gave them peace. Back at the hotel, everyone was thrilled. The boss proudly shared the links with guests, saying, "That's our man. That's our guard." The story appeared in a local newspaper a week later under the headline, "The Security Guard Who Played His Way into People's Hearts." But fame didn't change him. He still clocked in every day, still greeted guests with a smile, still checked the hallways like before. Only now, when he passed the piano, it wasn't just an instrument. It was a symbol of everything he had overcome. One evening, after another long day, the boss found him sitting by the piano alone. "You've done something remarkable," the boss said quietly. "You've reminded me and everyone here that passion can live anywhere, even behind a uniform." The guard smiled softly. "I just did what I loved. The rest, it just happened." The boss nodded, then said, "You know, we're hosting a charity dinner next month. Would you be willing to perform again?" This time we'll invite the media. Let's use your music to raise money for kids who can't afford lessons." The guard felt his chest tighten with emotion. "Of course," he said. "If my music can help even one child, I'll play as long as it takes." That night, as he walked home, the city lights reflected off the wet pavement. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the humiliation, the loneliness, the rediscovery. Life had tested him in ways he never expected, but somehow through the piano he had found a new beginning. The laughter that once mocked him had turned into applause. The rule that once forbade him from touching the piano had become the key to his freedom. And though he didn't know what lay ahead, one thing was certain: he would never stop playing again. The next few days passed quietly, though whispers began to move through the hotel like a soft wind. Some said the video of the security guard playing the piano had reached the boss. Others said he hadn't seen it yet, but soon would. Daniel didn't know about any of it. He just did his job as usual, checking doors, helping guests with luggage, answering questions politely. But every night, when the hall fell silent and the world outside went to sleep, his hands would find their way back to the piano. That was his piece, his small piece of freedom. One evening, while he was making his usual patrol, he noticed a few guests lingering near the lobby even after midnight. They seemed to be waiting for something. He didn't think much of it until one of them smiled and said quietly, "You're the one who plays, right?" Daniel froze. "I saw the video," the man added. "You're incredible." Daniel's heart sank. "Video? What video?" He smiled awkwardly and nodded, trying not to show his panic. After the guests left, he stood for a long moment staring at the piano, wondering if his secret had finally gone too far. He didn't play that night. For the first time in weeks, he walked past the piano without touching it. He knew if the boss found out, it could mean his job. The boss had made it very clear no one touches the piano, especially him. But as the hours dragged on, the silence in the lobby felt heavier than usual. The piano almost looked lonely under the dim light. Around 3 in the morning, he gave in. "Just for a few minutes," he whispered. He sat down and began to play, letting the music speak where words couldn't. This time the song was different. It wasn't a tune he had practiced or memorized. It came from somewhere deep inside. Each note carried his fears, his hopes, his regrets. He didn't know that up in his office the boss had returned late from a business dinner and heard the sound faintly through the corridor. At first he frowned, thinking someone had broken a rule, but as he got closer his expression changed. He stopped at the corner, watching from the shadows. Daniel played with such emotion that even the air seemed to pause. His fingers moved effortlessly, the melody growing softer, then stronger, as if it was alive. The boss had never seen anything like it. This was no random employee fooling around. This was someone who belonged to the piano. He wanted to be angry, to remind himself of the rule he'd made, but the music wouldn't let him. It held him still. When the final note faded, Daniel took a deep breath and stood up quickly, unaware that he had an audience. He turned and froze. The boss was standing near the stairway, his arms crossed, face unreadable. Daniel's heart dropped. "Sir, I'm sorry," he stammered. "I was just what?" The boss interrupted, his voice calm but cold. "Breaking the rules?" Daniel looked down. "Yes, sir. It won't happen again." The boss didn't speak for a few seconds. Then he walked over slowly, his shoes clicking on the marble floor. He stopped beside the piano and looked at it, then at Daniel. "Play that again," he said quietly. Daniel blinked in confusion. "Sir?" "You heard me," the boss said. "Play it again." He hesitated, unsure if it was a trap. But the boss's face was serious, not mocking. Slowly, Daniel sat back down. His hands shook slightly as he touched the keys again. He began to play the same tune, though this time his nerves made it harder to focus. But soon the rhythm took over, and his heart found the flow again. The boss stood there watching in silence. When the last note faded once more, he didn't speak right away. Finally, he said softly, "Where did you learn to play like that?" Daniel looked up, unsure how to answer. "My mother taught me when I was a kid," he said quietly. "Then I studied music for a few years before life got complicated." The boss nodded slowly, still looking at the piano. "Complicated," he repeated. "That's one word for it." He turned toward Daniel and asked, "Why didn't you tell anyone you could play?" Daniel gave a small, tired smile. "Would it have mattered?" The boss didn't reply. He stood there a moment longer, then said, "Go home. Get some rest." And with that, he walked away. Daniel sat there frozen, unsure what had just happened. He half expected to receive a termination notice the next morning, but when he returned to work, nothing was said. The boss didn't mention the piano, the rule, or the late-night encounter. The only difference was how people started treating him. The morning staff smiled more, guests greeted him kindly, and even the manager gave him a nod of respect. Something had shifted. Later that week, as he made his evening rounds, he found a small envelope sitting on the piano bench. Inside was a note from the boss. It read, "Play at 8 p.m. tomorrow. The lobby will be yours." He read it twice to make sure he wasn't dreaming. The next evening, the hotel lobby was arranged differently, chairs neatly placed, candles lit, and a small crowd of guests waiting. The boss stood by the side, expression calm but proud. When Daniel stepped forward, still in his security uniform, the room went quiet. He sat down at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. The music filled the space, warm and full of life. People leaned forward, listening intently. The same guests who had once laughed at him now watched with admiration. Some closed their eyes. Others smiled. The boss, standing near the back, folded his arms, saying nothing but clearly moved. For the first time, Daniel wasn't hiding. He was sharing what he loved most with the world again. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. He stood overwhelmed and gave a small bow. The boss stepped forward and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "From now on, this piano isn't just decoration. It has a soul again." The crowd cheered, and Daniel felt his chest tighten with emotion. It was the first time he had felt proud of himself in years. That night, after everyone had left, the boss approached him privately. "You've given this place something money can't buy," he said. "Would you consider performing on weekends? We'll arrange it properly, and of course, you'll be paid for both roles, security and music." Daniel couldn't find words. He nodded slowly, trying not to tear up. "Thank you, sir," he finally said. The boss smiled faintly. "You've earned it. And for the record, you're not fired." They both laughed softly, the tension between them gone. Weeks passed, and Daniel's weekend performances became a quiet tradition. Guests asked about him. Staff saved their breaks to listen, and even children who visited with families sat cross-legged near the piano to watch. He didn't play for fame or attention. He played because it healed him, because it reminded him that no matter how far he had fallen, he could still rise through music. One night after finishing his final song, he looked around the lobby, the same place where he once stood invisible. Now it felt alive, filled with warmth and laughter. The boss caught his eye from across the room and raised a hand in silent thanks. Daniel smiled back, realizing that sometimes life doesn't take away our dreams. It just hides them until we're ready to find them again. He locked up after everyone left and sat for a while in the quiet room. The piano stood under the soft glow of the lights, no longer forbidden, no longer untouchable. He rested his hands on the keys and whispered, "We did it." Then he played one last gentle tune before heading home. His heart full, his spirit free once more. The weeks turned into months, and the hotel lobby was no longer just a place people passed through. It became a place they wanted to stay in, even for a few extra minutes. Guests came down early just to listen to the security guard who played the piano with a heart full of emotion. His soft tunes filled the mornings, and his evening melodies soothed the tired travelers. Daniel still worked his shifts with the same discipline as before, but now, his nights ended with music and quiet applause. The boss had kept his word. Every weekend, Daniel was free to perform officially in the hotel lobby. The small gatherings grew each time, sometimes a dozen guests, sometimes even more. Some filmed him, others just sat silently, enjoying the moment. He never tried to impress anyone. He just played the way he felt, letting his emotions guide his fingers. Every piece told a story, and people listened as if they could hear his heart speaking through the keys. One night, after a long performance, a guest approached him, a middle-aged man with kind eyes. "You know," the man said, smiling, "I came here for a business trip, but I'll leave remembering your music." He handed Daniel a small card. "I run a local community center. We could use someone like you to teach piano to kids. If you ever have time, come by." Daniel looked at the card and smiled, unsure what to say. He didn't see himself as a teacher. He had always been the one learning, not the one leading, but something about the idea stayed with him. That night, when he walked home under the quiet streetlights, he kept glancing at the card in his hand. Maybe this was another door opening, one he hadn't expected. Days later, he decided to visit the community center on his day off. The place was small but full of laughter and movement. Children ran around, parents chatted, and in one corner stood an old upright piano. Its keys were slightly chipped, the paint worn, but when he touched it, it still sounded warm and alive. The man from the hotel recognized him instantly and waved him over. "I was hoping you'd come," he said. "These kids love music, but we don't have anyone to guide them." Daniel hesitated. "I'm not sure I'd be good at teaching," he said honestly. The man smiled. "Just show them what you love. The rest will follow." So he tried. The first day was messy. The children laughed, banged the keys, and barely listened. But then he began telling them small stories, how every note could express a feeling, how the piano wasn't about perfection but about honesty. Slowly the room grew quieter. Little by little they began to listen, to follow, to play, and when one of them managed to play a small melody correctly, their face lit up. That spark of joy reminded him why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. Teaching became part of his life. He would finish his night shifts at the hotel, sleep for a few hours, and spend his afternoons with the kids. The boss supported it fully, even donating a new keyboard to the center when he found out. "You've brought this hotel more good publicity than any advertisement," he joked once. "It's the least we can do." Daniel's life changed in quiet but powerful ways. He still lived simply, still wore his uniform proudly, but now his days had purpose beyond his job. Music, which he once thought he had lost, had become his bridge to people. He saw himself not as the man who stood guard in silence, but as someone who could make a difference, one note at a time. One evening, while playing in the hotel, he noticed a small group standing near the entrance. Among them was a familiar face, a local journalist. The man approached him after the performance and said, "Your story has reached a lot of people online. Would you mind if we did a feature on you? The world should know how your music is touching lives." At first, Daniel was unsure. He wasn't looking for attention. But when he thought about the children at the community center and the people who found peace in his songs, he agreed. The article came out a week later with the title, "The Security Guard Who Plays with His Heart." The story spread quickly. People wrote letters to the hotel, thanking him for reminding them that passion never truly dies. Some even visited just to hear him play. The boss watched it all quietly, proud but not surprised. One evening, he joined Daniel at the piano after closing time. "Do you realize what you've done?" he asked. Daniel looked up, confused. "You've changed this place," the boss said. "Before people came here to stay. Now they come here to feel." Daniel smiled shyly. "I just played," he said. The boss shook his head. "No, you reminded people of something important. Kindness, humility, soul. That's rare." As months went on, Daniel began writing his own pieces again. He played them for the hotel guests and later for his students. One of the songs became especially meaningful, a tune that began soft and uncertain, then rose into something hopeful. He called it "The Night I Played." It captured the moment his life began to change, the night he first sat at that piano, afraid but unable to stay silent. One day a letter arrived at the hotel addressed to him. It was from a small local radio station. They wanted to invite him to play live and share his story. The idea of speaking on the radio made him nervous, but with encouragement from his co-workers and students, he accepted. The day of the interview, he wore his cleanest uniform and carried a quiet smile. When the host asked him how it all started, he said simply, "With a rule I broke, and a dream I didn't want to lose." The host laughed softly and said, "I think that's the best reason to break a rule." After the broadcast, messages poured in. People from different places wrote about how his story gave them courage, to start again, to pick up an old dream, or simply to believe that it's never too late. Daniel read every message carefully, some bringing tears to his eyes. He realized that his music had done more than he ever planned. It had touched hearts he would never meet. One night, much later, after a long day of teaching and performing, he sat alone at the piano. The hotel was quiet. He thought about the long road that had brought him here, the years of struggle, the laughter from that first night when the boss made the joke, the fear of losing his job, and the moment everything changed. He smiled and whispered, "Funny how life works." He began to play softly, not for an audience, not for applause, but for himself. Each note was a thank you to the people who had believed in him, to the piano that had waited patiently for his return, and to the younger version of himself who had never completely let go of the dream. The boss walked in quietly halfway through the song, not wanting to interrupt. When Daniel finished, the boss said, "You never told me what that one's called." Daniel looked up and replied, "It's called Home." The boss nodded thoughtfully. "It suits you." From then on, Daniel kept playing. He performed, he taught, he inspired, and every time someone asked him how he got there, he always gave the same answer. "I just followed the sound in my heart." Years later, when people talked about the Grand Hotel, they no longer mentioned just the fancy rooms or the rich guests. They spoke of the man who once stood quietly in a corner, guarding doors but holding a hidden gift. The man who turned a joke into a journey and found his way back to music. And even after he retired, the piano in the lobby remained. Guests who came for the first time were told the story. Some even said that late at night, if you listened closely, you could almost hear the faint sound of music drifting through the hall. Soft, steady, and full of soul. Because once a man who was told not to touch the piano dared to play it, and in doing so, touched the hearts of everyone who heard him.